the rarest story in the world's aviation history. The giant Boeing suddenly ran out of fuel at an altitude of 41,000 feet.
Oh my God, what's happening? Damn it, Captain, there are too many people down there. What do we do?
The plane carrying 69 people risks crashing straight into the crowd below. What will be the fate of the Boeing 767? All will be revealed in today's story. July 23, 1983, Ottawa International Airport, Canada. A Boeing 767 of Air Canada has just landed at Ottawa Airport and is being checked and refueled for the next journey. This Boeing was newly put into operation by Air Canada in September 1981. It is Boeing's first wide-body twin-engine aircraft, and the first of its kind to feature a cockpit with a display screen designed for two pilots, eliminating the need for a flight engineer. Flight AC-143, a domestic flight within Canada, has a route from Ottawa to Edmonton International Airport, covering a distance of 2,900 kilometers, 1,800 miles, expected to take about 3 hours and 40 minutes. On this journey, the plane carries a total of 69 people, including 8 crew members and 61 passengers. The flight today is operated by a 2-member flight crew. The captain is Captain Robert Pearson, 48 years old. He's an experienced pilot with 15,000 flight hours, including 5,200 hours on the Boeing 767. Additionally, he's also a distinguished glider pilot. The first officer is Maurice Quintal, 36 years old, who was trained in seaplane operations in Gimli during his service in the Canadian Air Force and has accumulated a total of 7,000 hours of commercial flight time. Before boarding, the flight crew conducted routine checks on the aircraft and refueling process. Hold on a moment. Before we proceed with AC-143's journey, there are some important details to note. The fuel measurement system of Air Canada's 767s is different from the rest of the fleet. While other aircraft use various units, the Boeing 767 is equipped with metric fuel gauges, suitable for Canada's switch to metric units. However, aside from the fuel system, most aviation measurements such as altitude and speed still use traditional units like feet and knots. The conversion to metric units for the 767s reflects international standards for aircraft weight and fuel quantities. Additionally, the task of calculating and managing refueling was previously done by a flight engineer, but on the Boeing 767, Air Canada streamlined the crew to include only the captain and first officer, with no flight engineer, so the pilots had to handle this task themselves. Keep this in mind, as it is a crucial detail in the story I'm telling today. Returning to Flight 143, after being assigned the task of flying the plane to Edmonton, Captain Pearson calculated the required fuel for the aircraft to be 22,300 kilograms, equivalent to approximately 49,000 pounds. In reality, the Boeing still had 7,682 liters, 2,029 gallons of fuel from the previous flight. Since the volume of fuel changes with temperature, the weight of 1 liter of fuel corresponds to 0.804 kilograms. The precise calculation would be the existing fuel weight of 7,682 liters multiplied by 0.804 kilogram liters equals 6,176 kilograms, 13,616 pounds. The additional weight required is 22,300 kilograms minus 6,176 kilograms, which equals 16,124 kilograms, 35,536 pounds, corresponding to the additional volume needed by taking the weight per liter, or 16,124 divided by 0.804 equals 20,054 liters, 5,296 gallons. However, there would be nothing notable if the ground engineers hadn't made a critical error. They used an incorrect conversion factor of 1.77. This is the ratio of the weight of 1 liter of fuel in pounds per liter. The calculation they performed was the existing fuel weight of 7,682 liters multiplied by 1.77 kilogram liters equals 13,597 kilograms, 29,973 pounds. The additional weight needed is 22,300 kilograms minus 13,597 kilograms, which equals 8,703 kilograms, 19,186 pounds. The additional volume needed is 8,703 kilograms divided by 1.77 kilogram liters, which equals 4,917 liters, 1,298 gallons. As a result, instead of refueling with 20,054 liters, 5,296 gallons, the plane was only filled with 4,917 liters, 1,298.37 gallons, bringing the total fuel volume to 12,599 liters, 3,327 gallons, meaning the plane only had 10,129 kilograms, 22,326 pounds of fuel, less than half of the required 22,300 kilograms, 19,186 pounds. This was a serious error. The engineers even presented the calculation to the captain for verification before refueling, but he also made the same mistake and confirmed the calculation was correct. Moreover, before takeoff, a technician had checked the aircraft's instruments and discovered one of the 2 fuel gauges was faulty, so the system did not provide data to the pilots. The technician at the airport had turned off the faulty gauge for safety. When they arrived at Ottawa, another technician who had just completed an internship found it puzzling that a gauge was turned off, so he decided to turn it back on, resulting in the fuel gauge not providing data to the pilots again. Captain Pearson requested a replacement fuel gauge. However, Ottawa Airport did not have a replacement gauge for the Boeing 767, so the captain decided to proceed. He assumed that if enough fuel was added, they would not need the gauge. At 7 o'clock, flight AC-143 departed Ottawa, heading towards Edmonton with only half the required fuel.
AC-143, you are cleared for takeoff from runway 22. Have a safe flight.
Thank you. AC-143 taking off.
The giant plane slowly taxied on the runway, then gradually ascended, blending into the vast sky, leaving behind a faint white trail, marking the beginning of a significant journey. The horror at 41,000 feet. After takeoff, Flight 143 gradually climbed to its cruising altitude of 41,000 feet and continued to maintain this altitude as it flew over Ontario and into Manitoba. The first hour of the flight passed smoothly. At 8 o'clock local time, the crew and passengers had just finished their in-flight dinner. As the flight was over Red Lake, Ontario, 41,000 feet, the cockpit alert system suddenly sounded.
Low fuel pressure warning. What's happening?
Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal were shocked to see the cockpit instruments indicating low fuel pressure in the left fuel pump. Shortly thereafter, a second low fuel pressure alarm sounded for the right engine.
Damn it, this is not good. We need to land immediately.
Realizing the urgency of the situation, Captain Pearson decided to divert to the largest and nearest airport at that time, Winnipeg. The captain also made an announcement to the cabin and requested the chief flight attendant to prepare the passengers for landing.
Hello, this is the captain. We have encountered some minor problems and will be making an emergency landing now. Please follow the instructions of the chief flight attendant and prepare for landing.
The passengers, who were previously enjoying the flight, now became anxious and worried. They didn't know the specifics of the situation, but understood that an emergency landing was not a good sign. The cabin fell silent and passengers began praying. Back in the cockpit, after announcing to the passengers, the captain immediately contacted the regional air traffic control to report the emergency situation.
Winnipeg, this is AC-143. We have an emergency requesting guidance to land at the nearest airport.
AC-143, request approved. Turn south towards Winnipeg Airport and begin descent.
Despite the tension, Captain Pearson remained calm and began descending the plane to 35,000 feet to maximize gliding range and have more landing options. He had to control the 767 at optimal glide speed. Remember, the captain was a former glider pilot. He was familiar with flight techniques rarely trained or used in commercial flights. Using his experience, he adjusted the plane to 254.76 miles per hour. But unfortunately, just as the crew thought they could manage the situation until landing, the left engine ran out of fuel and suddenly stopped, right when the pilots began to turn. Shortly after, at 8:21, when the altitude of Flight 143 was 28,500 feet and 65 miles from Winnipeg, the right engine also stopped. The situation escalated quickly. The system issued a warning that the plane was completely out of fuel. The piercing beep-beep sound kept ringing. Everything suddenly became silent. Without fuel, both Pratt & Whitney engines stopped working just 5 minutes after the first sign of trouble appeared. In a very short time, the 767 lost all thrust, and most cockpit displays no longer showed any information. Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal found themselves in an unprecedented situation they had never faced or even trained for before. You may not know, in the early 1980s, flying an aircraft with both engines out was unprecedented. Worse yet, since the Boeing 767 was one of the first aircraft to use an electronic flight instrument system powered by electricity generated by the jet engines, losing both engines and lacking fuel meant most of the pilot's instruments lost power, including the aircraft's radar transponder. ATC could not provide quick and precise guidance for 143 anymore. Instead, ground staff had to use manual measuring tools to locate the Boeing 767. Fortunately, the RAT, ram air turbine generator, activated to maintain power for the aircraft's computer and rudder. However, they faced an even greater challenge: landing. Landing a jet without engines requires high precision, as only one approach can be made and it must land continuously on the runway without stopping. Turning back for another attempt is difficult, if not impossible, as making turns without engines can easily lead to loss of control. In this urgent moment, First Officer Quintal remembered an airport much closer than Winnipeg, the old RCAF base at Gimli, where he was trained while serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force. The airport was only 45 miles away. However, the current condition of that airport was unclear. It had a runway only 2,700 feet long, much shorter than Winnipeg's runways. Moreover, the airport was not secured and lacked emergency services in case of an accident. At this point, the crew faced a huge challenge, as they had no direct indications of landing speed. Most instruments had stopped working. The spinning engines created significant drag, causing AC-143 to descend at 2,000 to 2,500 feet per minute. While the captain tried to control the plane, First Officer Quintal manually calculated their glide path. The Boeing 767 had lost 5,000 feet of altitude in the previous 10 nautical miles, indicating a glide ratio of about 12 to 1. This means that for every 10 nautical miles, about 60,000 feet, the plane traveled, it lost 5,000 feet of altitude. This means the Boeing was descending too quickly. Currently, the plane was 33 miles from Winnipeg and 12 miles from Gimli. According to the first officer's estimate, they could only fly another 20 miles, maybe less. 8:31. After some discussion, the pilots quickly decided and informed air traffic control that Flight 143 would divert to Gimli. They used manual navigation methods to approach it, hoping the abandoned airport's runway would be clear and unobstructed.
This is AC-143. We will divert to Gimli. Winnipeg is too far. We can't make it there anymore.
Outside the cabin, the passengers grew more anxious with the plane's unusual movements. Some even prepared for the worst, writing their final messages on any scraps of paper they could find. Meanwhile, the flight attendants continued emergency procedures and reassured passengers, although they too were unsure of what would happen. Approaching Gimli runway, the unbelievable landing. As the altitude dropped to 8,500 feet, the plane began its approach to Gimli's runway. It is important to note that the Rat did not power non-essential controls such as flaps and slats, which increase lift and allow for low-speed flight. Therefore, Captain Pearson knew they would have to approach the airport at high speed, but he didn't realize that the Rat did not power the landing gear system. In the current situation with both engines out, the crew used gravity to lower the landing gear and lock it into place. The captain realized they were flying too high and fast and, if not corrected in time, would overshoot the airport. Immediately, the plane's speed was reduced to 186.41 miles per hour. The lack of hydraulic pressure prevented the extension of the flaps, which under normal conditions would slow the plane and increase wing lift, helping the plane land safely. Moreover, the landing gear seemed damaged. The landing legs were not locked in place and were blown out by the wind. In this critical situation, the captain and first officer considered performing a 360-degree turn. It was too late. They would touch down before returning to the runway. But don't forget, Captain Pearson was a glider pilot. He knew how to control an engineless plane, and in this case, there was a useful technique he knew called side slip. Side slipping involves dropping one wing and using opposite rudder to keep the nose pointing in the desired direction. This technique increases drag and steepens the descent without increasing speed. This was what Pearson needed. The captain informed Quintal that he would perform a side slip. Pearson then sharply turned the rudder right and the aileron left. The nose of the plane immediately swung right, and the left wing dipped sharply, putting the Boeing into a terrifying side slip. Just when they thought the troubles they had faced were bad enough, it wasn't over yet. Unbeknownst to the crew, part of Gimli Airport had been converted into a motor racing complex, now called Gimli Motorsports Park. And more horrifyingly, a race was happening with many families there to watch and camp around.
Damn it, Captain. There are too many people down there. What do we do?
With both engines out, the plane made almost no noise. The people on the ground received no warning of an approaching aircraft. Only when the plane was very close did they notice the massive 132-ton, 290,000 pounds metal object coming down. People began running in all directions, but through the plane's windows, two boys on bicycles could still be seen within 984 feet of the projected landing point.
Oh God! Run! Run now!
They had no other choice. As soon as the wheels touched the runway, it was too dangerous. The captain used all his strength to brake hard. The Boeing 767 skidded along the concrete, two tires bursting simultaneously, and the plane started scraping along the center guardrail, creating additional friction that helped slow it down immediately. This friction helped the plane maintain minimum distance and avoid hitting the people around. Fortunately, the two boys remained unharmed. Finally, after 67 minutes of being out of fuel, the Boeing 767, along with all 69 passengers and crew, landed without fatalities, with only a few minor injuries. A small fire at the nose of the plane was extinguished by racers and track workers equipped with portable fire extinguishers. It was indeed a perilous and unforgettable journey for the passengers on this flight. Causes and investigation. The emergency landing at Gimli instantly became the focus of international media for weeks. Given the seriousness of the incident, the Canadian Aviation Safety Board immediately launched an investigation into the cause of the incident. To understand the cause of the serious incident of Flight AC-143, let's go back to the day before the incident. The evening of July 22, 1983. The Boeing 767 had an unexpected problem upon arriving in Edmonton, Alberta. Routine maintenance checks during the stopover showed the cockpit fuel gauges were not working, despite the plane still having power. This was a serious issue because fuel gauges play a crucial role in monitoring the fuel levels in the aircraft's tanks. Information from the sensors in the fuel tanks is processed and transmitted to the gauges via two redundant data channels, known as Channel 1 and Channel 2. Each capable of providing data independently if the other fails. Technician Conrad Yurko in Edmonton discovered a fault in Channel 2 of the fuel processor using the built-in test equipment. He temporarily fixed it by pulling and resetting the fuse for Channel 1, disabling Channel 2. Data switched to Channel 1 and the gauges functioned normally. Yurko recommended replacing the processor, but with no spare parts available, he recorded the issue and the plane continued to fly with one non-functioning fuel channel. The next morning, a new crew led by Captain John Weir arrived to take over the flight. The issue was also reported to John Weir, but there was a misunderstanding. Weir thought the plane had been flying with this issue since leaving Toronto the previous day, whereas the fuel gauge problem was only discovered when the plane landed in Edmonton. The next day, Captain John Weir and his crew took over the plane in Edmonton, unaware of the recent ground issue. Luckily, the flight was entirely normal when it reached Ottawa. However, before the plane continued its journey to Edmonton, a technician rechecked the technical issues and accidentally turned on the previously turned off gauge. The fuel alert system failed again. This discrepancy would have been evident if the fuel gauges were operational, but they were not. Although it was clearly stated in the plane's minimum equipment list that departing without operational fuel gauges was prohibited, no one seemed to acknowledge this fact, including the pilots. Additionally, another cause mentioned was a calculation error due to unit confusion. Normally, the alert system would signal when the plane only had enough fuel for 45 minutes of flight, but in this case, it is unclear why the system did not activate until the fuel was completely exhausted. These factors were the critical points leading to the chain of incidents on Flight 143. Fortunately, the crew's skills redeemed all mistakes. However, after an internal investigation by Air Canada, Captain Pearson was demoted for 6 months, and First Officer Quintal was suspended for 2 weeks for their roles in the incident. 3 maintenance workers were also suspended. It wasn't until 1985 that the pilots were first recognized by the International Federation of Airline Pilots Associations for their outstanding skills and dedication. First Officer Quintal was promoted to captain in 1989, while Captain Pearson worked for Air Canada for another 10 years before moving to Asian Airlines for 4 years. After the incident, Canada Post issued a commemorative stamp for Air Canada Flight 143, praising it as a glider.